let's turn to our power-packed panel, get their take. They may agree or disagree. Here's former Atlanta Fed president and American Institute for Economic Research visiting fellow William Ford. Lawrence Meyer returns, former Federal Reserve governor. And Lee Hoskin returns, former Cleveland Federal Reserve president. All right. Larry Meyer, let me go to you. I think Bernanke was tough as nails today. I kind of enjoyed his whole shtick. He didn't give up anything on stimulus. And he's saying to these guys, yeah, you want to risk a recession year recession, an election year recession, go right ahead. I can't bail you out. Do you think that was his message?
Larry, I gotta love you. Look, the president didn't say don't raise taxes because that's going to cause a recession. He said don't cut spending as aggressively as Congress is thinking about. Let's not get the sequestration, etc. So no, I think you have a very political. Let's just say you have a political slant there. Now, what you said about the chairman's testimony, that's absolutely fair. More downbeat on the economy, not enough to suggest anything about significant action at the upcoming meeting, no QE, but you know, the risks are rising relative to the outlook and increasing possibility of QE by September. The economy has decelerated a lot, as the chairman said.
Yeah, the economy basically stinks. That's the way I put it. The economy basically stinks. Look, I don't mean to be political on this point, because actually the tax increases, I'm not either marginal tax rates, but most of all liquidity that will be pulled out of the economy. The tax hikes are much bigger than the spending cuts. The spending cuts for the coming year aren't all that big. I understand that Bernanke is referring to both, and I'm more concerned about tax hikes. But I think, Lee Hoskins, that Bernanke played his cards exactly right. He wouldn't say stimulus. He said, I'm not going to bail you out. You guys want big tax hikes? Larry Meyer says big spending cuts are also bad. Okay, fine. I am not going to give you QE to stop that. You're on your own. It's an election year, and I'm putting the heat on you. It was almost a Volcker-like testimony, Lee Hoskins.
Well, I thought he was pretty strong today in not folding and yielding to a lot of the senators that wanted the Fed to do more right now, even though the Fed doing more, whether it's QE, 3 or more twists, won't produce any jobs in the economy. It hasn't to date, and I don't see why it would in the future. But I think he was right to be tough in terms of his answers. And I agree with Lawrence that down the road, it won't happen, I don't think, this meeting, but if the numbers keep coming in the way they have been, and the Fed does get pushed around a lot by current numbers, which I don't think is appropriate. I think they ought to focus on a year out forecasts and not what happened yesterday. Yesterday's only important if it affects where you think the economy or inflation is going to be a year out.
Well, okay, but Bill Ford, all right, let's look at this. If the numbers come rolling in badly again, the next set of numbers, jobs, retail sales, manufacturing production, the whole 9 yards, we're going to get some housing numbers later this week. If the numbers keep rolling in badly, do you, Bill Ford, expect the Fed to cave in and throw some quantitative easing? Another $500 billion, let's say, for example. So that would put about $2 trillion of excess reserves that are not being used. See, I think Bernanke's come to the end of that line. I think Bernanke's kind of saying, you know what, we've done what we can do, we can't do anymore, I'm finished with it. What's your take, Bill Ford?
I'm with you, Larry, that he actually cited the the Congressional Budget Office forecast of what would happen with the fiscal cliff, and said you're looking at a 1 to 2% recession if you guys don't get your act together in Congress. And they have a meeting, as you know, at the end of this month, another one in September, and I would be very surprised to see them do QE3 because it hasn't done much. QE2, as you said, they've got $1.5 trillion of excess reserves that aren't being loaned out. The potential for future inflation is dangerous with all that high-powered money sitting there waiting to be converted to loans. So I think he played it reasonably well. But I have to agree with Lee that there's much too much attention on week-to-week number changes when we all know that monetary policy takes at least 6 to 9 months to have any effect on your changes.
Well, okay, but Larry Meyer, you know what? I'm going to take a different view tonight than my usual view. I've sort of been edging into this the last 3, maybe 4 months. I think that we are seeing some moderate deflation. My charts on the CPI, and we looked at the PPI last night, and I look at import prices, and the U.S. dollar is very strong, and some of these other economic indicators are weak. I think there's a wee bit of deflation in the air. What you think, Larry Meyer?
All right, I got a few things to say about what you said about the Fed caving in. That's a silly remark. Come on, you're telling me if the economy, if the unemployment rate is rising, that the Fed would be caving in to do more QE. Now, I disagree with Lee and Bill. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that QE has been successful, as the chairman said, and there's a lot of, as some research suggests. Now, with respect to deflation, no, I'm absolutely surprised that the chairman even mentioned deflation risk now. Inflation next year, and underlying inflation, shall we say, is running at 2%, very persistent and expected to be. Your story about deflation is about energy prices. Energy prices are not going to keep going down. They're not going to be $60 next year. So, no, there's no deflation, and I think there's no big inflation risk either.
All right,
okay?
so Lee Hoskins, let's move this story. You got a Fed meeting, what, July 31st, if I have that right, and you got a Fed meeting September 12th. What happens? Give me a forecast. September 12th is just in front of the election, but I don't really think the Fed's going to be political. Will they take any extra moves? 2 more meetings, July 31st and September 12th, before the election. What happens?
Well, my best guess is that they don't do anything in the upcoming meeting in the end of July. Again, it's hard to predict because they get pushed around by short-term data. And so if the data continues to look weak, then they will try, I think, in front of the election. As you said correctly, I don't think the Fed is political about this. I think that they'll do what they have to do. And if they believe that they can affect the economy a year out with another QE3, then they'll do it, even though I believe it's wrong-headed.
All right, Bill Ford, I'm going to give you the last word quickly, if you will. I think the Fed should stop paying banks for their excess reserves on deposit lying fallow. Stop the 25 basis point subsidy. Just say no interest rate, and maybe the banks will take that $1.5 trillion and push it out into the economy. The ECB did this in Europe, Bill Ford. I think the Fed should do it. Stop paying interest on these excess reserves, of which there are about $1.5 trillion.
That's exactly right. There's no reason for them to be paying the banks to keep their money in the bank instead of lending it out if they can find customers who they can trust and if they could get the bank regulators off their backs about being too tough on lending.
Put a little more money into the system.
Another part of the problem.
Make a loan in our lifetime. How about that? Bill Ford, thank you. Larry Meyer, thank you. Lee Hoskins, we appreciate it. Coming up, markets actually